Rutendo, welcome to the Penuel show.
What's up, my guy? How are you?
No, I'm good. So this is not an interview platform, and I'm hoping that as the platform grows, people understand that we're just having conversations.
Absolutely.
I think I've been asking you for the past couple of months to come and see me because you were very angry with me. But I think before we get to that, what have you been up to? What do you do? Sorry. People obviously I want to recognize your face. They're like, oh, here's this guy. What do you do? What are you passionate about? And what have you been up to lately?
Wow. I'm a marketing consultant and brand strategist. And currently my biggest project has been trying to redeem the image of Zimbabwe, the reputation of Zimbabwe. And within
to the world?
To the world, yeah.
Okay.
And within trying to address the reputation of Zimbabwe, we have to deal with the elephant in the room, which is the sanctions that are on Zimbabwe. So I'm actually currently one of Zimbabwe's biggest anti-sanctions activists.
Sure.
And that entails going up against the Americans, the Europeans, Canadians and Australians that have the sanctions on Zimbabwe, and at the same time, trying to change the narrative on Zimbabweans and telling the good Zimbabwe story. There's a lot of litigation involved. It also sees us meeting up with the issue of fighting the deportation of Zimbabweans irregularly with the ZDP case that we've got in the courts, and the issue of fighting the SABC and its negative portrayal of Zimbabwe. So there are a number of factors that come into the equation, but at the end of the day, it's all about the reputation management of the country of Zimbabwe.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're working with the leading political power in Zimbabwe?
No,
currently?
I'm actually not working with anybody. We're doing it pro bono, so to speak.
Okay.
So we're actually doing it without being paid. It's just a citizens' initiative. And slowly but surely, Zimbabweans are beginning to see the importance of what we're trying to do.
Sure.
And maybe somewhere down the lane, we will begin to monetize it, probably by doing similar reputation management for other people, similar reputation management for organizations. We've done it for people and companies in South Africa before. So I know it's something that works.
You're not willing to work with ZANU-PF and be like, look, this is for you. This is to help you guys make the country look better and to help. I mean, if you're speaking sanctions, that speaks directly to the work they meant to be doing. I
come from a very polarized country.
Yeah.
And my country is polarized on political poles. So the moment I go ZANU-PF, I miss out on all the other people that don't support ZANU-PF.
I hear you.
The moment I go on the other side, I miss out on the people that support anybody but the other guys.
Sure.
And to try and unite a nation means that we can't be partisan. I have to be somebody who's neutral, who can then begin to bring everybody together towards building the Zimbabwean common interest.
Sure.
And this comes after I'm a Pan Africanist, by the way. I used to be about Pan Africanism. And when I was about Pan Africanism, I was very popular. But it was hypocritical for me to talk Pan Africanism and uniting Africans when my own people are disunited.
I hear you.
When my own country is fragmented. So I had to go back home, focus on fixing home. And what is so interesting is that the moment I stopped being a Pan Africanist and focusing on Zimbabwe, I got hated.
Jeez. It's like you're selling out to the Pan Africanists.
To Zimbabweans, it's like you're protecting ZANU-PF by telling the good Zimbabwe story and redeeming Zimbabwe's image. People always believe that at the end of the day, a good Zimbabwe protects ZANU-PF. I don't see it like that. A good Zimbabwe protects Zimbabweans, 15 million people, and makes them better, makes them able to go back home, and makes them able to go back to a functional country.
Jeez, and you're right. I can imagine the political nuances. I mean, if the South African economy started doing well, because maybe we've built like super companies somewhere, people would say, well, the ANC is doing great. And you're like, this is not the ANC. So I can imagine you're saying to the world, Zimbabwe is great. The people that want the ZANU-PF gone are saying, no, we need the world to know that Zimbabwe is struggling. Otherwise, we'll never lose these guys. So, no, I fully understand. So you hated me at some point this year. So I think we need to maybe touch on that before we continue. Before we continue, I just have to state this. I've been a huge fan of your work, by the way. I had a period in my life from varsity till maybe a few years ago where I was very pro-black and black conscious. Studied all the greats, read all the books. I set up the Buy Black movement in South Africa. We got a group going together. We set up an NPO. And somewhere in that journey, I think I needed to take that journey to leave that where now I'm not a Pan Africanist. I just believe in good human beings. And I know that bugs you. I believe in good human beings, regardless of race, etc. But at that time, when I was still deep pro-black, black conscious, we need to create systems and what for black people, you were making amazing videos, specifically on the South African economy and the history of our economy. So I think when people see this video with your name, I'm hoping they'll go and search and see some of the highly educational videos, because as a Zimbabwean, you were teaching South Africans their own history that they weren't even aware of, especially from an economic perspective. So thank you for that. And then now this is your chance to bash me on camera.
What is actually interesting is I actually don't feel like bashing you. You and I have had a long history together.
We used to live together.
We used to live together. And we always
complex.
debating, and we were always debating. And you created a number of groups on social media, and we would clash there, particularly when you began to make the transformation.
Sure.
And I am unapologetically Pan-African, pro-African, and I believe that once you're pro-African, you're almost automatically going to be anti-neoliberal. You're going to be anti-white to a certain point, because their interests and our interests are opposed.
Sure.
I'm actually realizing that you're not only going to be opposed to whites, but you're also going to be opposed probably to even Indians, because they have been assisted to become the assistants of Europeans in pillaging Africa, in the project of pillaging Africa. And the problem that I have with the situation is that many people don't realize that white men took covenants, and their forefathers took covenants to come to the African continent after a decree made by a pope in 1453 that they must go and discover the black world anywhere where there are non-Christians, anywhere where there are brown peoples and non-white peoples. They must conquer. They must begin to develop European principles and European development patterns on those lands, and to enslave the people into perpetuity. And that meant they would have to take property rights.
Wait, are you saying this is as a real thing?
It is a real thing.
The Pope
Yes, there is
sent people to go and conquer.
100%.
Jeez, please continue.
What was happening is that in Europe, Europeans had gone into the Renaissance or the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. The Enlightenment brought up a lot of science, a lot of development. But that lots of development began to mean that they were consuming resources at a faster pace than they could replenish them. They were also beginning to destroy the environment, pollute water bodies, pollute the land, pollute the air. And that began to cause hunger in Europe. Mm-hmm. And that hunger caused a lot of wars in Europe. And that's why you see there's a lot of wars in European history. Sure. And I always hear people say, black people love fighting. No other animal on earth fights each other than the European, which is what you're seeing with Ukrainian war right now.
It's what they used to.
That's what they used to. And when they began to kill each other, there was this forward thinking that was coming from the church, which they were trying to escape from, by the way, when they went into the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
And the Pope then decided that, listen here, we are not going to sustain this race if we keep fighting each other. Mm. We're actually going to eliminate ourselves. And this is something a guy called Lothrop Studdard wrote a lot about, that
Sorry,
Europeans, a guy called Lothrop Studdard. Lothrop Studdard. What he is he's one of the biggest preachers of white supremacy. Mm. And he says that there was a point where Europeans actually were 33% of the global population.
Sure.
But they reduced from that amount to about 17% because of fighting each other and killing each other in the Great Wars. Mm. So what the Pope said in 1453 already, 1453, 1454, guys, we're not going to make it. Mm. We are going to die. We're going to become extinct by fighting each other, by diseases, by sicknesses, by pollution, and by the depletion of resources. So we need to spread out. And you need to go anywhere where there are non-whites. You need to go anywhere where there are non-Christians, and then you need to settle there so that we can spread our nation out.
Sure.
Hence, they began to move from the European continent. The migration that we're arguing about in Africa right now was caused by this great migration from Europe, where they had to go and find new lands, and they had to settle those new lands.
Sure.
And what I always say to South Africans is this. You're told that Jan van Riebeeck is the first person to come and settle in 1652. No, it's not true. It was actually the Portuguese in 1485. Bartholomew Diaz landed in Cape Town. He tried to discover Cape Town in line with this decree that was given by the Pope, and the Khoisan fought him. They fought him on 3 occasions. The first occasion was Bartholomew Diaz. The second occasion was Vasco da Gama. And the last time...
Vasco was also Portuguese.
Vasco was also Portuguese.
Sure.
And the last time was in 1509 when they defeated de Almeida, another Portuguese coming from conquering India. They came back and they said, let's finish what Bartholomew failed to finish.
Sure.
Got there, the Khoisan remembered these guys. And part of the European law was that when you discover a piece of land, you put a cross, which was called a padrao. And once you've established your padrao, you need to then make sure that you begin to build European settlements in the area. They tried to put a padrao when they landed there with de Almeida, who was a military man coming from conquering India. And they had a fight with the Khoisan. De Almeida was killed in that war, together with a number of other men. They left and never tried to settle South Africa again because they got defeated.
That's shout out to the Khoisan, by the way.
Shout out to the Khoisan, but this is where it gets interesting. So the Khoisan defeat the Portuguese, 1509. Then by 1590, we begin to have the next writings on white Europeans coming again to Cape Town. This time it was the VOC, which is the Dutch East India Company, but it was in cahoots with the East India Company of England. They landed in 1592, and they began to trade with the Khoisan.
Sure.
What we hear is that between this period, 1592 and 1652, 2,200 ships landed at Cape Town, and they were trading and refilling at Cape Town. We understand that the Dutch, the English, and others had begun to leave their people in the colony of Cape Town, where they were buying and trading with the Khoisan, the Xhosas, and some Zulu people who had migrated to that area. They were trading. They left ambassadors. They left seeds. They left fruits so that they could come and refill. They were taking cows. They were taking sheep. They were taking goats from this area and using that to victual their ship or to supply their ships.
I guess it's shout out to the guys who came with a different model, because I'm guessing the Khoisan probably were resistant. But someone there was like, no, we're actually here to trade with you guys. And they tried a different model to begin getting people to
even
stay
at
there.
the beginning, the first landing with Bartholomew Diaz.
Sure.
In his books, he writes about the fact that there were dark-skinned people on shore. And they were light-skinned, dark people on shore. That's why they called the very first place that they saw, they called it Dosh van Quirosh, which was to say black man's land or something to that effect in Old Portuguese. So what then happened is they did get on, Bartholomew Diaz landed and they traded with the Khoisan.
Okay.
The problem came when they were trying to take water without permission. And the Khoisan asked, why are you taking the water without asking?
Sure.
To establish that there was already a property rights understanding among Xhosa people, the Khoisan people. But who were the dark-skinned people? Those were Xhosa people, together with the Khoisan living in the same area.
Sure.
It's when they tried to take the water without permission that they fought. In the same way that when Vasco da Gama came and landed, they wanted to trade with the Khoisan. In that trading, there was someone who got stabbed because the Khoisan are saying they tried to cheat them out of their cattle. And they also wanted them to explain why during the Bartholomew Diaz visit, they had ended up killing one of the Khoisan people after being challenged about using the water.
Sure.
So trade was already an established issue, together with asking for permission.
Okay.
So this notion that the Boers always have that there was no one occupying this land, there were people occupying this land and they were possessive. And the Europeans who came, the VOC, they knew that. They had read it in the Portuguese text. They had experienced that the Khoisan were not going to tolerate people trying to tell them how to do things. So they came in 1592 and started trading.
Sure.
And they traded for close to 60 years with these people. They established diplomatic relations. There were Xhosa people and Khoisan people who spoke Dutch and Dutch people who spoke Khoisan and Xhosa. And this was what was happening in the Cape between 1592 and 1652. There was trade.
The important dates, 1543.
We start with 1485.
1485. That's Bartholomew.
Yes.
1485.
85. Then we go to 1496.
1496.
That is Vasco da Gama.
Okay.
Then we come de Almeida, 1509.
1509.
And then we have a very huge gap.
Sure.
Where we don't know what was happening, but we know that Dutch ships were passing.
Sure.
But then we start having writings that start talking about 1592.
1592.
With the Dutch East India Company landing together with the English East India Company. They landed a ship that was being thingied by both of them. They traded.
Thank you.
And the trade was established. And 2,200 ships landed at Cape Town.
Sure.
And traded for 60 years before
Jan van Riebeeck.
Jan van Riebeeck. And many people don't understand that Jan van Riebeeck issue.
Before you speak about Jan, I've heard rumors about, you were speaking about the Khoisan would speak Dutch, and there's rumors that the Afrikaans language in itself was actually created during that trading that was happening at the time. That now that white Afrikaners are almost claiming it as their language, it was actually a language created almost by the Khoisan people with the people they were trading with.
And I like the way you've understood the interpretation that it is the Khoisan who created the language.
Sure.
Because of the trade that was happening between them, the Portuguese. So it was the Dutch, the Portuguese, the French, Huguenots, and then the English and other people that were coming to this port. You've even got Japanese people that have written about this period.
Jeez.
You've got Chinese people who've written about this period, because what is interesting about the Chinese is they came before everybody else in 1419.
Came where?
To Cape Town and to Africa. They're the first people to circumvent. That's before we accept the theory that Africans actually circumvented before them. But let's leave the African theory, not to
1419
complicate.
Chinese people.
1419 with Zheng He.
Okay.
Zheng He came and landed in Africa and left evidence of not only pottery, not only beads, but also blood. They made children.
Of course.
And never colonized us. And never colonized us.
That's the best way to make sure that you were there. People can see it. I live
the blood. Correct. So
Jan van Riebeeck, sorry.
Yeah. So Jan van Riebeeck comes in as if they just came for the first time in 1652.
And he was Dutch.
Yeah. They didn't come for the first time. There was an established settlement and an established relationship of trade between the nations. And there was a clear understanding of property rights between these people who have been trading with each other for 60 years. If we want to take it to the 1485, then we know that it's about 200 years.
Sure.
Problem came in the aspect that the Dutch were having to trade and give wealth to black people. There were rich black land barons were developed. There were rich black traders were developed. Exactly what happened in Nigeria or Jaja of Opobo. And that didn't sit well.
Sorry, please say that again. In Nigeria?
In Nigeria, we've got a similar story with an oil baron, or the first oil baron or billionaire in oil, who was called Jaja of Opobo.
Jaja
of Opobo. Who used to sell palm oil.
Okay.
So they were now paying Khoisan people rentals. They were paying Khoisan people for supply of the fruits, of the grain, of the meat, everything, and water. They had to buy water.
The Khoisan were basically the first rich.
These guys were merchants and they were wealthy.
Jeez.
So the notion that we as black people don't know how to trade and do business, or we need BEE today, is actually not founded on correct principles.
Yeah.
We need factors of production that the Khoisan used to make themselves multimillionaires.
Sure.
That is what made the Dutch uncomfortable, because the Dutch East India Company was not making as much money as it could, because it spent a lot of money re-victualling their ships or resupplying their ships here in South Africa, because you could not make a trip directly without stopping supplying. Now imagine what you need to supply a ship that has to be on sea for 6 months.
Yeah.
You got to give it a lot of things.
Of course.
So prostitutes were there. There were hotels there.
Sure.
There was everything, and it was controlled mainly by the landowners. And who was the landowners? It was the Khoisan. And the Khoisan had shown resistance to colonialism. But this time, they were placated into comfort and trust. They've been having this relationship with these Dutch people and the English people and everybody else who was landing, including Americans. And so there was nothing to fear. These were beneficiaries. These were comrades. These were partners.
They got comfortable.
They got comfortable. And on this day, 3 ships came, and those ships did not come to victual or to supply. They came with soldiers. Soldiers who the Khoisan didn't think about. didn't worry about, didn't even consider. And that's how the Dutch took over Cape Town by force, deliberately to usurp the property rights that existed then. And this is why we say when the Dutch are trying to say that property rights start with them, they're lying.
Sure.
Because they established proper property rights in European terms by 1592. And they maintained them.
Sure.
And they maintained trade and exchange of value up until 1652, when they decided that, you know what, we don't want to pay anymore. We want slaves. We want the land. We want the resources. We want the fields. And that's how you then hear the first farm, Klein Constantia, got established in 1670 or something. It's nonsense.
This information you get from just reading?
From books, yes, correct. And what I do is I triangulate. So you read books, but the most important records that exist are the Portuguese manuals and manuscripts that exist in the Portuguese archives that are written in Portuguese. You then correlate those with what's written by the English, by the Dutch, by the Japanese, and other people who had passed through the Cape.
To cross-reference, basically.
Cross-reference, and then take the shipping manifests and shipping logs of the time.
And this is some of the boring stuff you enjoy reading?
Yes.
Jeez.
If I have to fight imperialism, or at least if I have to fight the imperialist system, I've got to understand it.
Yes.
I've got to read.
Yes.
Because that's what they do that we don't do.
100%.
And if I intend for us to plan 300 years, 400 years from today, then we have to understand their strategy, because they were planning 400 years for today, then when they took the land.
What is imperialism? What is white supremacy?
Imperialism is a system in which is a continuation of that legal, or let's call it a religious doctrine that became a legal doctrine of discovery. The legal doctrine of discovery has become our international law, because it was then called law of nations. So imperialism is the continuous maintenance or manifestation of that religious doctrine or that legal doctrine of whites owning everything and controlling everything. And remember, part and parcel of why imperialism is being manifested by the Americans today is that America remains a colony. It's not white man's land, it's Indian.
Yes, it is a colony.
It's a colony. So it is actually an illegal institution according to the decolonization laws of 1960. It is actually people who are still being colonized and dispossessed by British people. Germans are actually the biggest population in America.
Really?
And that's why America continues.
I assume it's Spanish.
No, it's actually German people. Okay. Germans are the biggest population in America. So the racism that is in America is driven by Nazism, or at least that ideology.
You know, when you think of the South African land issue and how we complain, and someone were to explain to you, America as a whole is the illegal land occupation, and the natives of there, they're not even a minority. They're almost non-existent. That's scary.
And this is why now, when I think it makes sense to you now that it becomes axiomatic for me to fight sanctions, because the country that has got sanctions on my country for taking back its land is a country that is refusing Native Americans their own land. Number one. Number two, they built their wealth off the industrialization of slavery, or what is called chattel slavery, which till today persists because they have not made restitution or reparations to the people that they occupied. Yet these very same Americans would then defeat the Germans for occupying the Jews for just 5 years. And within that period, they decided to give Jews land in Palestine to compensate them and to restore them into a position of dignity, just because they were massacred by the Nazis for just 5 years. So now imagine what that translates to when they have enslaved Black Americans. 15 million people till today are subjugated. They've been disempowered. They cannot buy property in certain places because of systematic racism. And then these people want to come to Africa and tell us about democracy, human rights, and yet they're the biggest violators. Till today, they kill women and children, murder women and children for oil.
Yeah.
Just between 9/11 and now, they've killed over 3 million Arabs for their oil and their resources, and they're actually stealing Iranian oil, Libyan oil, and Syrian oil to make America the biggest oil producer in the world. That's insanity. Such a nation, such a virus does not have a place in a civilized world where we're supposed to be exchanging value for value. And they still want to maintain something called property rights based on what they've stolen.
I wanna say this because it's quite triggering. The hypocrisy is quite deep, and I'm just trying to think. Firstly, it seems like the fights historically, and even today when you speak Russia, Ukraine, and arguably even these supposed xenophobic fights and attacks, a lot of the fights are for land, and it seems they'll always be for land, number one. And number two, I've posted this a couple of times on certain platforms. I fundamentally believe America's the biggest bully on the planet. Will anyone ever stand up to this bully so that the world is just slightly more fair?
Truth of the matter is that people have been standing up to this bully. The reason why Patrice Lumumba died is because he was standing up to this bully. The reason why Kwame Nkrumah was removed, Sekou Toure were removed, and a whole lot of other people. Robert Mugabe was hated because of fighting this bully. But we're fighting a very powerful bully. And I think sometimes when I lash out at xenophobia, like I was lashing out to you.
Sure.
My lash out to you was anger to say, you should know better. Our enemy is a very clear enemy who's used divide and conquer for a very long time. He divided and conquered the Khoisan, the Zulus and Xhosas, to the extent that after the Boers had eliminated the Khoisan people, they wanted us to believe that it was the Zulus who wiped out the Khoisan.
Jeez.
Which is nonsense, because the Khoisan have proved that they were able to be actually better fighters of these imperialists than even the Zulus were, because they were being enslaved at that time by the Portuguese and being brought to winelands to come and enslave there. So now we are falling into the same trick, where we are going to be pitted against each other as people who actually liberated this region from the very same people. And I want to make this clear. You must understand that Southern Africa is one of the only regions in Africa that collectively defeated imperialism through the gun, including the Boers. There's always been this notion that you guys negotiated your independence. No, you did not negotiate your independence. The Boers were defeated in what we call the border wars. They went into Africa. While they were killing people here, they were also killing people in Southern Africa, in Angola, in Namibia, in Zimbabwe, and in Mozambique, to try and destabilize those countries so that they wouldn't join you or they wouldn't join your liberation forces to actually fight the Boers on South African land. When the Boers got defeated in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, Angola, and Namibia, they retreated. Because they had a lot of their machinery was destroyed, a lot of their military equipment was destroyed, they had lost a lot of lives, but they were under sanctions. So when they came back to South Africa, they didn't have a means to rejuvenate their army to fight an onslaught by SADC countries on South African soil. So eventually, like the Rhodesians that have been defeated, that have been pushed off and would have had to leave. So the Americans were very quick to say, whoa, hold on. You've lost this war. And you're not going to win this war. So you need to negotiate. And when you negotiate, you need to divide and conquer. Negotiate only with the ANC. And when you negotiate only with the ANC, you need to take the icons of the ANC and give them the best that you can. Shares in white companies, shares in apartheid banks, shares in apartheid institutions that had dispossessed the South African people. And that way they will create policies and laws that will then protect your continuation of ownership of the same property rights that Jan van Riebeeck took by force. So this is what happened. And that's why you saw then, people say Mangosuthu Buthelezi was fighting other black people because he was trying to protect white interests. Mangosuthu Buthelezi had refused to be co-opted into the Bantustan system that would have legitimized the apartheid government in what would have been called the constellation of Southern African states, which would have included the Bantustans and the SADC countries, and they would have all formed a United Nations or United States in which the apartheid government would lead, but it would be legitimized as a state of separate development because all other African countries, other Southern African countries have accepted that. Mangosuthu Buthelezi refused that.
Are you saying he was a good guy?
SADC countries refused that. And the reason why Mangosuthu refused is he said, we need you to get all our comrades that are in prison out, then we negotiate the way forward for South Africa as one nation. We don't want this Matanzima, what you call it, and who is our guy, Mangope, separate development type of arrangement.
Sure. Are you saying Mangosuthu was a good guy that was trying to unite?
He had his problems. He had his problems. He was compromised in his own ways like every other human being.
Generally,
he had a good vision of saying no negotiation for South African peace or South African independence can happen with me alone without the fighters in prison. Now imagine who was in prison, who was in exile. It was the ANC. It was the PAC and their fighting wings. So this notion that the ANC then came back and said, we are the liberators and therefore we are going to negotiate on our own, was doing exactly what it is that Mangosuthu Buthelezi refused to do. So this is why you see that he began to fight back. Because then the very same whites who had refused to create a legitimization of the Bantustan system then went and partnered with him to say, let's destabilize the country accordingly. And that's why you started having the fights with Inkatha and so forth and so on. But for me, the very first sellout was the ANC. Because when it went to CODESA, it should have invited everybody to the table.
And I've heard that's one of the big issues, that they went there alone. And to this day, it's not even if they went alone, they didn't go out to bring other people and say, guys, this is what's happening. What do you think?
And remember,
they made those decisions on their own.
And remember, they should have invited all the South African liberation movements, and they should have invited to that very same table the armies of SADC that had actually defeated the Boers.
Yeah.
Because the Boers had been defeated by guns, tanks, and jets. That's the only language that a white man understands. And they were being given these weapons. They were being given weapons by the Americans, including nuclear technology and nuclear weapons. But they were still defeated by the Cubans, by the Angolans, by the Zimbabweans, Mozambicans, and Namibians. Those should have sat at the table too. Because what happened by them not sitting at the table is that the apartheid system used its military, but they also used their private companies that were very well invested in SADC to destroy SADC countries economically through sanctions and then militarily through the military in what was called the State Security Council. So when ANC negotiated with the Boers secretly, got shares in these apartheid companies, in Anglo-America that was instrumental in financing the manufacture of bullets, the manufacture of tear gas, the manufacture of bombs, and the military machinery that was in this country. When the ANC then said, let us reconcile, let's be friends. White people and black people are going to be friends. We've got interests in your companies now. They allowed us within SADC to be forced to maintain these white companies, which I call economic weapons, in our own countries because they were now with our friends, the ANC. So those companies continued to sabotage our economies. Zimbabwe had the biggest steel manufacturing company in Southern Hemisphere. Nothing in Australia, nothing in Brazil could beat it. It was destroyed by Anglo-America, sabotaging that institution because they did not want a black country to have the power to control steel. And that's why when you guys get your independence, the very first thing they do is they privatize Sasol and they also privatize ISCO.
ISCO, yeah.
Why? Because they wanted to deprive you of the power to make chemicals, the power to make steel, and the power to make your own military equipment. And that's why right now they're fighting to take Denau so that you don't have the capacity to manufacture the trucks and the guns and the machinery that Denau manufactures.
Sure.
White people are always thinking 300 years ahead to continue subjugation because the way they've created their civilization, they say it's innovation. It's not innovation, it's stealing. They want to maintain their stealing by controlling the weapons that are used to steal. Just like Etsotsi in Hillbrow wants to maintain his right to have a firearm when you are not armed, or right to have an AK-47. It's the same thing that is happening on an industrial scale or a national scale.
My first question to you is, why would the SADC armies allow this to happen? Allow the ANC to be co-opted by the whites? Allow the ANC to make these deals on their own? And even to this day, kind of allow what we call BEE fat cats to thrive having known, or did they even know this history?
You know, it's tricky. The ANC is filled with very intelligent people, intellectuals.
Sure.
And if you look at the struggle, I actually think ANC could have been the driver of the intellectual engine of the struggle. They might not have been might not have been the military engine of the struggle, but they were definitely the intellectual engine of the struggle. But many people say that they were the intellectual engine to a certain extent, because then we have PAC coming in with Subuke taking it to another level, together with people like Biko, with black consciousness and real fight for transformation. That also goes hand in hand with African countries starting to fight for their independence in the 1960s with the ideologies of Kwame Nkrumah. So the ANC takes it to a certain point, and then they stop, and then other people take it forward, where the intellectualism now needs to be mixed with the militarism. So we believe that by the time we get to independence, you've got a people who are intellectual enough to have wanted to emancipate blackness, not by defeating white supremacy, but by being part and parcel of white supremacy. That is why the ANC has always kept up the intellectual fight and not turned it into the militarization of that intellectualism. And they have committed themselves to this perspective all the way till to the end, including to the time that they sit at the CODESA negotiations, is they're not trying to destroy white supremacy. They're trying to be partakers by managing black interests or black hurt or black suffering or the black aspiration. So when they get to CODESA, they're not trying to destroy white supremacy. They're trying to be part and parcel of white supremacy and to be the management of the of the blacks. And they successfully got that arrangement where they are managing black sentiment, they're managing black aspirations. They give black people in this country your grants. They give black people as much freebies as possible. They've even allowed white companies to continue to intoxicate black people with alcohol so that they are continued to be placated not to ever rise up and fight. The EFF is exactly the same. Julius Malema is created to be a valve for black youth. When they get frustrated, when they're ready to revolt, he will always tell them the day is coming, relax.
Pacify them.
They'll pacify them, because the ANC alone can no longer pacify them. So there are now two black liberation movements that are closing the revolutionary space by pretending to be revolutionaries so that they continue to placate black people and continue to make black people feel that one day we will do it. But now, what this has done is it has allowed white people to continue to manifest their monopoly on South Africa and the region. And right now, the South African financial system has got reach across the entire continent. And so the continent is now struggling to liberate itself from the last vestiges of white imperialism because of South Africa. The South African mercenaries that were part of the Boers are still going to destabilize parts in Africa. They're the ones that are causing problems in Congo. They're the ones that provide weapons to the peoples like Kagame. They're the ones that continue to destabilize Sierra Leone. The security system of South Africa, the mercenaries of South Africa, the ones that are currently guarding Americans in Libya, in Iraq, and a number of those places.
You're dropping too much knowledge, man. I think we're going to have to take this into segments, because now you're speaking about Kagame being given weapons. Yo. Firstly, I want to apologize for my cough. But let me try and... Yeah, no, Rutendo, you're going to have to come back. So you were giving us a very beautiful history lesson of settlers in South Africa. Bartholomew Diaz, Vasco da Gama, those are names I've known from basic history in school. I didn't know the other gentlemen. I know fundamentally South Africans need these history classes again. And people are always like, stop living in the past. And it's part of it is to make sure that you don't know the past so that you're not sure of actually what's happening now. You're painting a picture that some of us kind of know of how the ANC got into bed with, I guess, what you'd call white supremacy. And a conversation I've had with a mutual friend and father of ours, Joshua Maponga, was this concept that African leaders, which was my thought when we spoke on a platform, African leaders have become managers of this orphanage, this charity house called Africa. And the people that run the biggest parts of the economy, they allow them trinkets like a nice house, nice car, some shares to make sure they pacify the masses, feed them, etc. I hadn't thought of what you were saying of Julius Malema being a valve where when the youth is angry, ANC sold out, we're angry, BEE, let's rush to our commander-in-chief, Julius. And then he says the things that kind of calm you down. And he points to a future which may never come until they find the next pacifying or pacification tool. Now you're speaking about the South African financial system, which has infiltrated the entire continent. I think Standard Bank might be the biggest bank on the continent. I know ShopRite is the biggest retailer on the continent. And now you speak about Paul Kagame, who's currently worshipped as an example of a great African leader doing great things for Africa. Is that not the case?
That is absolutely the case. Kagame is actually one of Africa's biggest problems, because Congo is the biggest dissettlement of Africa that causes Africa never to unite. And Kagame is the reason why we've got the Congolese struggle.
The DRC, my basic understanding is that it's the wealthiest country
in Africa,
on the continent from a mineral perspective.
In the world, yeah.
It's the wealthiest country in the world from a natural resources perspective.
100%.
And you're saying Paul Kagame has a part to play in that?
Yeah, people don't understand that we always hear about the Rwandan genocide. The Rwandan genocide was started by Paul Kagame. And he started the Rwandan genocide because he wanted to take power by force in a country that would have never elected him into power, because he came from the minority Tutsis who used to be supported by the colonizer and used to be the administrators on behalf of the colonizer. So for Paul Kagame to come back as a Tutsi to come and take power in Rwanda, he needed to do something. And what he did is he started the genocide. He started the genocide by bringing down a plane that had two presidents, Hutu presidents, the Burundian president and the Rwandan president. Paul Kagame and his RFP forces shot down the plane when it was landing back in Rwanda from actually an AU meeting. And when that plane came down, then it inflamed the Hutu people who knew that they were RFP fighters who were trying to take power by force. And so they began to fight against Tutsi people who they felt wanted to come and take over power. While they were doing that, Paul Kagame himself sent his forces to murder his own Tutsi people on a whole-scale level to make it look like a genocide, so that he could then have his forces come into Rwanda and take over power militarily under the guise of stopping a genocide against Tutsis.
These are all things that are factual.
Well documented.
Jeez.
It is actually something that the International Court of Justice wanted to persecute him for, and then the Americans covered up for him and the French covered up for him so that it wouldn't come out. But Paul Kagame came into power by murdering his own people. Then when he did that, he then took Laurent Kabila, who was now living in Rwanda, to go and take over power from Mobutu Sese Seko.
These are the leaders in the DRC.
This was in the DRC. And the arrangement that he had with Mobutu is, once you're in power, you need to bring some of my own people into your system. And the reason why he wanted to bring his own people into the system is that the Tutsis see themselves as a superior people to Bantus. And so they want to reinstitute something called the Mapororo Tutsi Empire that is going to rule over Central Africa and the Great Lakes. Because if you look where they came from in Uganda, Museveni is Tutsi. And he is the one who trained, together with people like Paul Kagame, in Tanzania, together with our liberation fighters. And when they came from those liberation camps, then Museveni went and took power from Obote, and then he put people like Kagame and the Hutus and the Tutsis into his army and intelligence. They then started murdering non-Tutsis who wanted power in Uganda, because they were majorities. And that's how Museveni becomes the president of Uganda as a Tutsi, and then he begins to assist Kagame together with the Europeans, the Americans, to then create a force that is going to take power in Rwanda. And then they must take power in Rwanda, instill a Tutsi in Burundi, and instill a Tutsi in Congo. So when they then succeeded in getting what do you call him? Kabila into power, Kabila refused to put Tutsis into his government. And when he refused, then Kagame and Museveni then sent their armies and rebels into Congo with an intention to remove Kabila. Kabila then ran to SADC. And that time SADC had an organ, or the military institution was called the organ, which was being headed by Mugabe. And he said, listen, they want to overthrow me. And he gave them the reasons why they want to overthrow. Mugabe sent a fact-finding mission that it consisted of Zambians, Namibians, Angolans, South Africans, and everybody from SADC region. And he realized that this was actually a problem. So they went to Uganda, they went to Rwanda, they couldn't find Museveni when they went to Uganda, they couldn't find Kagame when they went to Rwanda, but they got information that there was going to be an overthrow of Kabila, and then the UN was going to be forced to actually come up with a policy that says Congo must be broken down into 5 countries.
Jeez.
The 5 countries would then be easier to loot for the West through Uganda, Rwanda, and their own people that they would have placed within the Congolese system. Then Zambia and Zimbabwe came up with a counter proposal, but they also sent their armies of the Namibians and the Angolans to go and stop Kagame from overthrowing Kabila. They were able to repel Kagame and Museveni's troops. And so Kabila was not overthrown because of that. For that reason, and us taking land in exactly the same time, the Western world came together and imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe. Because they said that this military that was used in Mozambique, that also participated in Angola, and now is coming to Congo, is becoming a hindrance to imperialism. So we need to break the power of the Zimbabwean military. Let's put them under sanctions. So that's what caused the sanctions. So when that happened, it was fortunate that enough war had been undertaken by the Zimbabweans, the Namibians, and the Angolans for there to be people within the Kagame and the rebel movements who agreed to the Sun City Accord. And that's why you had peace in Congo and the Sun City Accord that was then brokered by Thabo Mbeki. But remember, when Zimbabwe...
Broken by Thabo Mbeki? Brokered, okay.
Yeah. But remember, Thabo Mbeki was able to come and assist in negotiations. But Nelson Mandela had refused to go to Congo and assist Kabila on instruction of the Americans. The Americans said, you don't go there. But there is allegations that while all this fighting was happening, executive outcomes had people assisting Kagame and Museveni and the rebel movements to try and overthrow Kabila. So Kagame was being assisted. Museveni was being assisted by ex-SADF forces who are now calling themselves the mercenaries or the executive outcomes. And I think you've seen the video of Saima that talks about how black people were infected with HIV and how Saima went through SADC to kill certain people to protect apartheid, if you remember. There's a video on Saima and how they infected people in South Africa and Southern Africa with HIV. The same people are these that are called executive outcomes, are the same boers that then form these private security companies that you see here that are actually the biggest threat to South Africa at this particular moment. They are the same people that went to destabilize Congo and continue to destabilize Congo and continue to be advisors and continue to be supplying weapons and continue to be a destabilizing force in Congo. Which is why some of us are very skeptical. Why is the South African military in Congo not actually stopping the war in Congo, but peacekeeping and protecting companies like Glencoe and the Western companies that are looting Congo?
I wanted to speak on that because when you started speaking about companies that are involved on the continent, when you speak DRC, you're speaking Dan Gertler, who does diamonds there and who's very close with, I think it's Joseph Kabila, the son of Laurent, or who was assassinated. You speak Glencoe, DRC, other parts of Africa, even Libya, I think you mentioned. Glencoe, I stand to be corrected, also funded the supposed rebel armies there. It's scary.
It's scary
for me. 2 things. Since you spoke about Julius being a pacifier for the young black South African who's angry, Julius claims to be a Pan Africanist. He wants to remove the borders. Do you not support that, number one? And then number two, I guess it's going to lead to another question about borders in general. Your thoughts around Nhlanhla Lux, who was the reason why you were actually bashing me, because I did an interview with him and DJ Spoo, and you were very unhappy with the fact that I was chilling with him, and he's become a mate of mine now.
With Julius, the issue, he's not a Pan-Africanist, he's an opportunist. And you were saying that there were times when we used to make videos that used to inspire people like you.
Yeah.
And I was one of the first Pan-Africanists to start really bringing out this issue of African unity and what it is that the book that was written by Kwame Nkrumah, which is the neocolonialism, the last legs of colonialism, was actually talking about why we need to unite. Julius never spoke about that at any point before people like me started speaking about it.
Sure.
And so he was opportunistically groomed to start talking about that so that he could take the position of revolutionary in South Africa and Africa to shut out other voices that speak like that. How do I know this? Because when I began to make those videos, I used to have videos that would hit 100,000 easily. 200,000, 300,000, 500,000 at that time.
And that's besides being shared on other platforms.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what started to happen is the moment I started making those videos, I got shut down by Facebook, by Twitter, and every platform.
Welcome to my life.
They shut me down. People can't see my videos. People can't find me. And worse still, when other Pan-Africanists would come and ask me to come on their shows like what you have done, immediately after I've come there and we've spoken on the issues that I speak about, they would have their pages unpublished and removed.
Sure.
And then they began to realize there was a problem. But when Julius began to talk Pan-Africanism, they never did that to him.
Yeah.
In fact, the South African media, which is white-owned, which is controlled by the Ruperts, which is controlled by the Oppenheimers, gave him so much platform to speak. Social media gives him so much platform to speak. His pages are never muzzled. His Twitter page is never muzzled. Go to my Twitter page. You'll see that 60% of the people can't even see my post because they'll see that it's written sensitive content.
It's called shadow banning.
Shadow banning.
Yeah.
They've never shadow banned Julius. Now, if you remember South African history, PAC, they shadow banned. In fact, they actually got to point of banning outright Mangaliso. Till today, Sobukwe's voice cannot be heard. It has been blackwashed by even the ANC.
Yes, the ANC doesn't give him much homage. A lot of kids don't even know who that is.
Biko was killed.
And he was the only prisoner that was isolated, I believe, on Robben Island.
And
that's how dangerous they believed he was.
He's the only man who they made a specific law to keep him in prison even when his time was up. Julius would be treated like that if he was a threat. Julius's corruption charges would have been investigated and he would have been found guilty by courts of this country that are compromised.
Sure.
But it never happened. I got to a point where I'm muzzled by the biggest billionaire in Zimbabwe for what I say. Julius has never been muzzled by anybody.
Who's the biggest billionaire? Strive?
No names. But the biggest billionaire in my country came to South African courts to get a gag order for me. When you are a threat to the system, they treat you like that.
Sure.
When they love you the way they love Julius, when he goes to see the Queen, when there are allegations that Julius actually got given money by the Queen and it was cleared by the Reserve Bank of South Africa that blocks any other monies that come to any other person that they don't approve of, which apparently was one of the major reasons he fell out with Winnie Mandela, is that he got this money, didn't share it with Winnie, didn't tell Winnie about it. This is when you realize that Julius is compromised. He's not a Pan-African. He's not out for the struggle. And lastly, anybody with Pan-African credentials understands that the proxy war for Pan-Africa, especially the soft war, is being fought in Zimbabwe. Reason Zimbabwe is under sanctions, reason the United States declared 3 national emergencies against a small little country like Zimbabwe and declared it a threat is because Zimbabwe has taken land and is changing the very same law I told you, the 1454 law of discovery. Julius will bash the ZANU-PF government that is fighting a war for land that he says he wants to undertake. How does that make sense? And he will use allegations from white media from Oppenheimer Media to bash the ZANU-PF government without any proof, without any evidence. He's doing exactly what it is that the Americans have done, where they make allegations that Zimbabwe abuses human rights. They don't go to any court. They don't prove the case in any court. They don't go to any international bodies that are supposed to be the arbiters of these kind of issues. They don't prove their case within those courts before they impose sanctions, which should have been imposed by the UN if Zimbabwe was really abusing human rights. The case of Zimbabwe must have been taken to the UN Human Rights Council. It wasn't.
Jeez, they just use the media
They
to
just
paint
use
a
the
narrative.
media and then they say human rights violations. But yet, while they're saying that, America is one of the only countries in the world that has ever been indicted by the International Court of Justice for funding terrorism in Nicaragua in 1989. They're the only country now that the Iranians who are under UN sanctions took the Americans to the International Court of Justice in 2018. And they won that the sanctions that they've imposed on the people of Iran, the Americans are breaking international law and they are violating human rights. Zimbabwe then went to the same UN, and the UN said the sanctions on Zimbabwe are illegal and they are violating human rights. If not, they're a crime against humanity. The reason you got all these refugees in South Africa is displacement by sanctions, displacement by deprivation of water, healthcare, education, and government services because of sanctions on our government. Julius Malema won't speak about that, but he's a Pan-Africanist.
Would you say that Robert Mugabe was a good leader? Would you say the ZANU-PF is a good political party? Are you even allowed to speak about that?
Yes, I can speak about it. I can speak about anything.
Sure. A lot of Zimbabweans are very scared, by the way, of speaking their truth, especially about their government and their leaders.
Mugabe was a brilliant leader. Zimbabwe would have broken down into civil war just a few years into our independence because of destabilization of South Africa and causing tribal conflict in the country. It didn't happen because of Mugabe's actions and Mugabe's decision making. The country remained together after that because of an armistice and an amnesty that Mugabe undertook, and he brought together the two warring factions, ZANU and PF-ZAPU, to create ZANU-PF. We've had peace in Zimbabwe ever since. Crime in Zimbabwe is very low.
I've heard it's very low, but I've heard it's probably because the prisons are very scary and the police are very scary there.
The police in Zimbabwe do their job competently.
Jeez.
So you undertake a crime now, you are likely to be caught before the end of the day.
Sure.
So they do their job.
ZANU-PF. Please speak into the mic.
ZANU-PF has got its problems. It's lacking intellectualism. It's lacking people that are...
Intellectualism?
Oh, yeah.
But Zimbabweans are highly intelligent.
Yeah, but...
being well-educated.
Being well-educated is not intellect. And being well-educated is not intellectualism.
Okay.
So, for instance, I'll give you examples. That's one of my worries.
Sure.
A lot of the people that are in ZANU-PF now are people, especially the younger generation that came after the struggle, are not interested in driving the agenda that ZANU-PF had. They're interested in enriching themselves. Because remember, ZANU-PF defeated Europeans on the battlefield for our liberation. They then went and fought the Boers and were partially responsible for the defeat of the Boers. They went to Mozambique, they went to Congo, they went to Angola. They killed Savimbi, by the way. Savimbi was killed by Zimbabwean soldiers because he was causing more problems in Angola even after the Boers were defeated. They went to Somalia, they went to Chad, they went to Guinea. Right now, we've got Zimbabwean soldiers in Guinea protecting the Guinean president from the coups that have been happening in the rest. So ZANU-PF has been that revolutionary, making it the most revolutionary political party, probably on the African continent, probably in the world. But that revolutionary standard is a very high standard that requires a maintenance by morality by its members. And I don't think a lot of its members are maintaining the morality that are required for that. The intellectualism is lacking in the aspect that right now you see people trying to separate the Mugabe era and the current president's era. It doesn't make sense. ZANU-PF is as great as it is because of its history. And so therefore trying to separate the two is a lack of intellectualism and is a lack of a moral compass that understands heritage and its importance. And one of the major reasons why they demonize Mugabe today is because of the fact that Mugabe is demonized by the rest of the world. So it becomes easy to demonize him to try and get, affection from the Europeans.
Sure.
And I keep saying ZANU-PF should know that Europeans are never going to be affectionate to ZANU-PF because ZANU-PF, like Muammar Gaddafi became, needs to be removed if the European system is going to stand and if the European ideology of property rights belonging to only white people is going to stand. Now, unless ZANU-PF is going to reverse land reform, unless ZANU-PF is going to capitulate to the wills of the whites, they obviously and surely should know that whites will never, ever be friends with them, even if they denounce Robert Mugabe.
Before you give me your thoughts on Nhlanhla Lux, you're doing work in branding Zimbabwe as an amazing country, and you're hoping that the sanctions can be removed. Is that not a form of hypocrisy to what you stand for? Because it seems you want the same people you're saying they will never love us, they don't care about us, but you're hoping that they will have a softer heart and remove the sanctions and be willing to do trade. How do you reconcile those two seemingly opposing ideologies?
Sanctions are a violation of human rights. According to the Geneva Convention, even in wartime, a nation cannot impose sanctions that collectively punish, disproportionately punish, and indiscriminately punish civilians. So when we're fighting sanctions, we're fighting for the human rights of Zimbabweans to be able to have freedom of development so that they can be able to have the basics. Food, water, healthcare, jobs, and an economy that functions. We're also asking for Zimbabwe to have the right to trade internationally without hindrance. So the problem with sanctions is that they don't stop us from trading with the West only. The West actually put in secondary sanctions that punish anybody else from other countries or third parties that does business with Zimbabwe and then wants to do business with the West.
Jeez.
So for instance, when your banks right now are being pushed to block certain Zimbabweans from having bank accounts in South Africa, and those banks are blocking Zimbabweans from having bank accounts from South Africa without trying those people, all because the United States said that they must do it because those banks are afraid to be removed from the international banking system. They're afraid to have their payments of South Africa being blocked when they're sent through to SWIFT and other international banks. They're scared to have their relationships or corresponding banking relationships with other banks blocked. So that over compliance to sanctions, that third party imposition of sanctions or implementation of sanctions is what we're fighting for when we say sanctions must be removed. Because they stop us even from trading with South Africa that has got nothing to do with the sanctions on Zimbabwe. However, it has been proved that the banks that are doing these things are doing it when they have no cause to do it. Why do we know this? There's a bank called CBZ in Zimbabwe. It was being forced to implement sanctions. It refused. It traded with companies that were on sanctions list 15,200 times. The United States put a penalty of 3.8 billion that was then reduced to 300 million. And still that bank said, no, we're not going to pay the penalty. So the United States said, you're going to pay the penalty. So these guys went to a law firm and they began legal action. And eventually the United States had to capitulate. They had to cancel their penalties, and that bank continues to open accounts today for people that are under sanctions. So that proves that the sanctions or the penalties or the requirements of the sanctions are unenforceable. That's why the United States couldn't enforce it. So we are saying to South African banks, why are you not doing the same? Why are you not refusing to comply with sanctions? And when you're penalized, you take the United States to courts internationally to fight against this illegality and you being forced to impose an illegality. So my answer to your question is, what are we doing? We are fighting these sanctions and we're utilizing the legal process. Why the legal process? Because they made the rules. They created Roman Dutch law. They created international law. They created human rights law. They created the UN Charter. And now we are holding them accountable to their own rules. The banks in South Africa that are implementing the US sanctions illegally, we're using the South African Constitution to say that you cannot punish anybody without trial. You cannot deny anybody their rights for no reason without court orders or without some form of a due process. So that's why we're doing that. And that's how we're fighting these guys. We're fighting for our right to trade. We're fighting for people to have the right to have accounts. We're fighting for the right for our nation to be able to have our payments cleared, because currently that's what stops us from buying machines for our hospitals, stops us from buying medicines, stops us reindustrializing and buying tools and machinery for our industry. It even stops us from getting certain software. There's certain services Like there was a time that PayPal would not work in Zimbabwe. There's a time that I think right now we got into a point where money transfer services like MoneyGram are struggling to do business in Zimbabwe because of sanctions. We can't have that because we've got relatives all over the world that need to transfer money. They're having blockages. Yeah. So let's talk about
your thoughts on Operation Tutula and Nhlanhla, and then I'd like to get clarity on when you say the problem is the West, the problem is America, sorry. When we speak about Europe, when we even speak about South Africa, what it looks like to me is that the average citizen, some of this history you're giving, I think the average white person is not aware of. White supremacy, imperialism, I think the average white person is not aware of. Including average black people. Sometimes you find yourself on sides you're not aware of that you're actually part of fighting something you don't even know. So if we're saying an America is the problem, let's say an ANC, a South Africa, a Europe is the problem, are we speaking about the entire country, or are we speaking about specific people in specific positions who act on behalf of the country? Meaning that we can't hate Americans. We can actually isolate the rot type of situation, but you can answer that.
That's deep.
After Operation Tutula.
That's deep, bruh. That's deep. Nhlanhla and I talk, and I've got no issues with him.
Sure.
Because I believe that he is doing what he's doing for personal gain.
Okay.
I don't see him as a person who's that patriotic to believe that foreigners are the problem in this country. Or to believe that foreigners are the cause of crime in this country, or foreigners are the reason why people do not have jobs in this country. I don't believe that he believes that. But
you don't believe that he believes that?
No, I don't.
Or you're not saying that it's not happening?
Oh no, it's happening.
It is happening.
It is happening.
So there are crimes due to foreigners. There are jobs being taken by foreigners.
For me, the issue is there are definitely jobs that are being taken by foreigners.
Okay.
There are a lot of low-lying jobs that many Zimbabweans are doing that South Africans could be doing. But here's where the problem comes. When I left Zim after being invited to come and undertake a job here. So my work permit was given directly from Harare. I had to apply for a work permit after being given this offer. And I took this offer because my reputation in Zim had been destroyed. I had an ex-girlfriend of mine. We broke up after I caught her cheating. And it so happens that my company that I was working for, a tire company, I was a salesperson there were tires that were being stolen at work. And she went and told her boss, her uncle, who was my boss's best friend, that I'm the one that's stealing the tires.
Jeez.
And I had income that used to come from modeling, that used to come into my account and other things I used to do. She said that those monies that were coming into my account were proceeds from the tires that were being stolen. Without investigation, without any due process, I was fired. But what happens is, if you're fired for stealing, it goes onto your CV and your resume. And immediately from then, any company that wants to employ you gets to know this information. So I had this agency that used to do my applications for me. I then got 2 interviews with Microsoft and Mentos. Those guys offered me the job, both at the same time. As we are making a decision which offer to take, going to go to the States for 6 months or Australia for 6 months, depending which company I took, the manager at the job that fired me for stealing without investigating, on this day, the same day we were deciding which CV to take, phoned the lady who was doing the agent, because that agent is the one that got me this other job. And he was just talking, small talk. Within the small talk, he raised the issue. Oh, you remember that brilliant guy that you gave us? Yeah, we fired him because he stole. This is 6 months later. This lady got spooked because now she's saying, listen, Microsoft is our biggest client. Mentos is also one of our biggest clients. And now I am looking at a CV where you are going to get quite a lot of money and you're going to be placed to work internationally. And right now, there is an allegation of theft that is now being raised by a client that also employed you. I hadn't disclosed that because we all knew that there was no basis. You have no conviction, you didn't get sent to prison, so there's no basis. But if Microsoft are to ever catch wind of this, then I am going to get into trouble and will probably lose the client. So I'm going to have to disclose this information.
Sure.
So she discloses this information, I don't get the job. In fact, she withdrew my candidature on these jobs that are already waiting for me to decide.
Sure.
She actually had to call me at home and talk to me and my dad about this. That's how serious it was. So I got to a point where I was no longer marketable. My CV would not go anywhere as a person who stole from his job. So when the South African opportunity comes, the offer comes, I have got no option but to take it. I need a new start. I need to go somewhere where I have to start afresh, because in Zimbabwe, I've become untouchable. Now, had I known what I know today, I would have probably applied for land. I would have probably done what I needed to do. But at that time, we're told black people can't farm.
Sure.
We're incapable.
Sure.
So I ran away from land, came to South Africa to start this opportunity that I was given so that I could build up a CV and savings to go into business. So when Trandalax bundles every single person that is in South Africa as a person that jumped the border, as a person that is illegal, a person that came to take opportunity, that's wrong.
Sure.
Secondly, when I got here, I had this job, but this job was incumbent on me earning after working. And I didn't have enough money to pay rent in the end of the month. I didn't have enough money for food. I didn't have enough money for anything. So the very first thing I did when I got here, 2 days into South Africa, never been here before, was to walk in Sandton and look for a waitering job.
Sure.
And so there used to be a restaurant called Montego Bay. I walked into there. So there's a white manager there. I said, hi. He said, hi. I said, my name is Rutendo. I'm looking for a job. This guy looks at me. You're looking for a job? Why should I give you a job? Because I'm very good at selling. I'm very good at selling. I'll sell. I'll make you money. He says to me, do you have a white shirt and a black trousers? I said, yeah. He says, come tomorrow. Montego Bay only had white waiters then. I was the first black waiter they ever employed. And I got in there, started making tips. You'd make tips of about 150, 200 bucks a day back then in 1999.
Sure.
It was a lot of money. So the waiters that were in there were medical students, white medical students, white lawyers and advocates who had just finished school, were working in Sandton for some of the biggest law firms. And white kids were at university. And what this guy said to me is that you have guts. You walked in here and you asked for a job. You literally demanded a job.
Sure.
But the way you presented yourself, your aggression, your passion, your confidence made me give you the job. As you can see, we don't employ black people here.
Sure.
Because no one else does what you did. So point I'm making is that there are many jobs that are out there that are only given to people who go and apply for them or who go and seek them. I went to look for a waitering job. I didn't think I was too good for it.
Sure.
I needed the money.
Sure.
But more importantly, I didn't fear to go and ask for the job. And it's the same in many places where you see black Zimbabweans working at the exclusion of black South Africans, because the black Zimbabweans are willing to go and ask for that job. There are many jobs that black South Africans want to do. And with me, having lived in South Africa for the period that I've lived now, if I'm broke, I no longer go and ask for a waitering job. I think I'm too good for it.
Sure.
I think I'm too good for it because I have been in this system of grinding and working hard and being a slave that I don't want to be a slave anymore.
Sure.
All of a sudden, I understand the psyche of the black South African who saw his mother, his grandmother going to work for a white person on an inferior job and coming back home feeling like a pickaninny because of the way they feel it. And most black South Africans don't want to be slaves. That's why those jobs are available.
Sure.
But Zimbabweans are willing to be slaves. Zimbabweans are humble. Zimbabweans will cooperate with their bosses. They will take nonsense from their bosses. Which is what is interesting, is that after I worked there for 6 months, I had a fight with my manager a white manager in that same restaurant, and beat him up in front of customers.
Jeez.
And I had to leave. But funny enough, the very same guy that gave me the job phoned me when I was at home and said, come back to work tomorrow. Point was, I couldn't take the slavery too. I reacted in a way that most other Zimbabweans would not react in a job like that, where they take crap from these guys. I couldn't take the crap.
Are you aware that Nhlanhla Lux and Operation Tudula have split ways?
Yes, I'm aware.
are you aware that he's gone on platforms to vocalize that he's not about all foreigners? Yep. He's only about illegal foreigners. And do you agree with that? That people that have not come in legally with papers should be deported? Or do you support removing borders like Julius Malema says? Right.
I don't support removing people because they're illegal, because it still doesn't work for me to be a Pan Africanist and to say an African is illegal on the African continent. Doesn't make sense to me.
Sure.
It also doesn't make sense to me when we say we understand Zimbabwe's sacrifice for Africa, understand that Zimbabwe is being punished for its sacrifice to fight apartheid, to fight imperialism in Congo, and for us to take land and to teach the rest of Africa that land can be taken and you can actually prosper.
Sure.
I don't believe that a country that is being fought now by illegal economic warfare, when its people are being displaced as refugees, just like the Ukrainians are being displaced, you then say that those people are illegal immigrants. Sure. Even if they enter the country without following the refugee procedures, that doesn't stop them from being refugees. And so one thing I've been saying to the government is that we need to start regularizing a process of educating Zimbabweans on, one, how to apply for refugee status, number one. Number two, trying to assist Zimbabweans to get as much opportunity in Zimbabwe to benefit from the struggle and the revolution you've undertaken. So it should be easier for Zimbabweans to use their land. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. Zimbabweans have got land. Every Zimbabwean has got land in their village, including myself. And none of us, or most of us, are not using it.
A similar thing happens to a lot of South Africans, by the way.
Yeah.
They've got tribal land waiting for them, but they don't want to go there.
And I have gone to Zimbabwe where I've seen people who are millionaires doing chickens, goats, sheep, you name it, from their rural properties and not government land that was given from land reform. And so if our government could begin to do that, to teach people to use their rural areas, and how do you do that? By telling the stories, by showing the successful people who are already doing it, by having these as TV programs, these as online programs, these as the kind of things that are beginning to tell Zimbabweans what the new role model of Zimbabwe looks like. He's not an accountant, he's not a lawyer, he's not a marketer like me, he's actually the farmer, he's actually the miner, he's actually the guy who starts small with a pick to try and get some gold. Those are the new heroes of the country. It's the suppliers of fuel in Zimbabwe who are actually broken the monopoly of BP, Shell. Those are the new heroes. The Zimbabwean government has to actively show those people for Zimbabweans to stop thinking that coming across the border is the only way.
Sure.
And I know that because I was a victim of that. When my CV didn't work, when I couldn't get a job in Zimbabwe, when my reputation was damaged that I can't get a job or be employed in Zimbabwe, I thought my only option was to take an opportunity being given in South Africa so that I can work for somebody.
Sure.
Had I known, had someone shown me that you can actually be a farmer, you can farm on your rural land, you can be a miner, or you can actually lease land from somebody else, grow something and export, I wouldn't have come. But if I hadn't come, I wouldn't be fighting sanctions today because I wouldn't have understood the institutionalization of racism and the intellectual approach of dealing with it. That is something I learned from South Africans. So with Nhlanhla Lux, he needs to understand those nuances, that Zimbabweans travel to South Africa for different reasons. There are South African companies going out of their way into Zimbabwe to headhunt talent for South Africa. There are Zimbabweans who are jumping the border because they are refugees being displaced by a war that is partially caused by the sacrifice we've made for many other African countries. There are Zimbabweans who are coming here legally as refugees. You can't bundle everybody into one box, and you can't mistreat refugees that have come out of a struggle against imperialism that still exists in South Africa. South Africa is going to need Zimbabweans. Nhlanhla Lux has got to understand that. South Africa's biggest threat is not Zimbabweans. It is the grip that white people continue to have on this economy that is almost going to make it suicidal for you guys to want to empower yourself. For instance, the seeds of this country don't belong to South Africa. They belong to Western countries. The day you want to take land, they're going to take away their seeds. Syngenta, Monsanto, and Bayer will hold their seeds. There'll be starvation instantaneously in South Africa. When that day comes, South Africa will need seeds from other countries. A lot of the land in South Africa is not going to be usable because it's used to fertilizers and chemicals. For that land to be usable, you're going to need organic fertilizers. You're going to need them from the rest of Africa. When the economic system crashes here and payments are blocked in South Africa and you're under sanctions like Zimbabwe and banks don't want to do business in South Africa, you're going to need a Zimbabwean banking system that works, a SADC banking system that works. You're going to need a united SADC that is going to prop up South Africa, prop up South Africa's goods, allow South Africa to pay for medical equipment and tools and so forth. For that to happen when that day comes, and I suspect it'll come soon, because you've got an ANC that needs to revolutionarily change something, otherwise you're going into a coalition government. That ANC cannot afford to go into a coalition government with whites who are going to arrest every single black South African millionaire who's politically exposed. So those people within the ANC who are going to be targeted by a coalition of whites and Herman Mashaba are going to have to make sure that they stay in power. How will they stay in power? How will they get people to vote for them? They've got to take land. They've got to economically transform this economy. They've got to take mines. They've got to change the constitution.
Just in closing, can we agree that the majority of human beings, not just Zimbabweans, not just South Africans, not just Americans, not just Europeans, are generally ignorant? They're not aware of the things that are happening.
Yeah.
And this goes back to my question. Who do we isolate as the problems in the world? If we're going to say America, I can imagine, if you say America, you're not talking about some black girl who lives in the projects or some white guy somewhere who's also just working at McDonald's. They probably don't understand the dynamics of how the world is working. So when you speak about in America, when you speak about any evil force in the world, who are these people we're speaking about? Because that's fundamentally what I'm trying to get to, so that I don't unnecessarily, and I think this is meant to be the message that goes out to South Africans, that be careful of bashing the wrong people when the problems are actually somewhere else. Who are those people and how do we find them? And I think that's going to be my last question.
In Zimbabwe, we always have a problem of everybody saying the problem in Zimbabwe is corruption. In South Africa, we've got the same problem. And most of those people who say that don't actually understand that corruption is actually the foundation of capitalism. For you to have a capitalist society, you have to have a mechanism that takes resources that belong to everybody or resources that belong to the public, and you need to privatize those resources and give them to the few for them to then enslave everybody else's labor to make money in the capitalist system. So it is the people who started that system that have to be blamed first. Those people that have primitively accumulated what are public resources, and they use them to enrich themselves and to enslave others by denying others those, are the very first layer to be blamed.
Sure.
It is us, the publics, who accept capitalism as a system because we hope that one day we will be one of the few that are sucking the blood of everybody else that are also part of the problem.
All of us are just trying to get to the table. We're not trying to break the system.
And by doing that, we talk corruption when we are corrupt ourselves. You work at a multinational company that primitively accumulated by stealing resources, and then you get a salary, you buy a nice car, you don't understand that you're actually corrupt.
And you've become complicit in the crimes.
And you're complicit in the crimes. Then the next layer is our politicians, who are us again. But they're the ones that we then choose from ourselves to say, you become our representatives. These men and women have the ability to change the laws and the system to reset.
Yes.
They are the ones that can say, like happened in Zimbabwe, we're taking land whether you like it or not, because we make the laws. And this is why sometimes when people say, Tata Mandela sold out, I say, whoa, hold on. Tata Mandela negotiated this nasty thing called CODESA. But in it, he allowed one man, one vote, and an ability to pick a parliament. And in this negotiation, they made a constitution that says that you can actually change the constitution once you use your parliamentary majority or your 2/3 majority. ANC has had a 2/3 majority, I think, 3 times.
Sure.
And they never used it. Tata did his job. And all those who came afterwards and were empowered by a 2/3 majority to then do what Tata couldn't do because he had to compromise, didn't do it. It is those people that are a problem.
Sure.
It is those people that have allowed the continuation of apartheid in South Africa. It is those people that continue the dispossession of blacks. It is those people that have continued to allow the Constitution to give whites the right to rule this country through that document. And then you also have to blame the people who control the education system. Why do we still have a colonial education system till today? Why do we continue to have an education system that continues to make our lawyers think that Roman Dutch law is the way that Africans must govern themselves when there are very few Romans and very few Dutch living in this country? That's the problem.
Sure.
So once we blame everyone that I've showed you here, you'll see that every one of us is culpable. We, the society that brings out the politician, because the politician is our son, we elect him, we are the problem. We, the publics who continue to elect the politician who doesn't bring results, are the problem. We, the publics that continue to accept a system of politics that actually doesn't allow us to choose leaders, but it just allows us to choose a beauty contest where we select the most famous or most popular person. We are the problem.
Sure.
We, the publics that have not demanded a change of our education system, for us to have an education system that empowers us to actually have the mind, thinking, and intellect to know how to bring solutions to our own problem. But we always work to bring solutions to other people's problems or other people's benefit, which is why till today, every black person is an administrator of white interests is a problem. Your show today can make a difference if you begin to have content that actually changes and transforms the black mind into how to give solutions.
Yes.
And the day that you begin to do that, you will see that you will not become popular, they will block you, and so forth. And if they're already doing that to you, then you are already doing what I'm talking about. You're educating people in the way to bring solutions to African problems. If we're not doing that, we're all to blame. And the few that are doing that are the few that might say they're exonerated from blame, but our complicity to the system to some point will always make us as guilty as everybody else. The day we fix that, the day we begin to separate ourselves from the system, the day we begin to refuse to be part and parcel of it, and how do we do that? You cannot say you want to be empowered and you're an advocate of alcoholism. You are an advocate of consumption. You're an advocate of abusing women. You're an advocate of continuing to dance every Sunday and every Friday when we've got nothing to celebrate in a system where we are still slaves. Until we begin to wean ourselves from that, till we stop having TVs in our houses, till we stop buying newspapers from our enemies, until we start saying, let's now create something of our own, information-wise, food-wise, seeds-wise, and we begin to really build something that is going to make us have autarky from our enemies. We're playing, and we're also to blame for the system.
Jeez. Rutendo, thank you very much for coming through, and I'm looking forward to hosting you again soon. Too much knowledge to be shared. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. And I guess that's the reason why they end up blocking me, because this information mustn't come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thanks for the opportunity, brother.